Now let's look at some other MoGraph objects. First up is the matrix, and the matrix is really similar to the cloner. It's got the same kind of modes, and it generates matrices only, and you can also generate thinking particles, but is beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. So the matrix is just points, they don't render, but you can use this to kind of debug your scenes. It's obviously very fast in the viewport, and a typical example might be if you have a very heavy scene, just playing through this, we've got lots and lots of clones happening, and sooner or later this is going to go into box mode and we won't be able to see what's going on at all. And just, it's really starting to chug. There we are. So if you were to try and navigate this scene, it's having a bit of difficulty. So yeah, it's very slow to work with. And so this is where things like the matrix can come in handy, and this new function where you can actually come up to the MoGraph menu with your cloner selected and just swap the cloner for a matrix. And this is kind of like a temporary thing where you can now just let it refresh. Now we can move around the scene and it's just all buttery again. So once you've finished doing what you need to do and you've made your changes and tweaks, you can then come back and swap this back out. You just have to be aware of the mode. You see that's gone blank. So just switch that back to whatever you had it on. I think that's a bug, but Maxon do know about it. So there you go, you can debug scenes and use that matrix to do that. But also there's some other uses for it as well. This is when you're working with deformers. So if we're looking at this first example, we have our cloner, we've got cylinders being cloned, and they're being deformed by this bend object. And that's how this hierarchy is set up. But they do not look like regular cylinders. They've got this weird edging to them, weird kind of chamfer. So if we just close that down, and this is what happens when you use a matrix object. So the cylinders look like cylinders. They haven't got squished edges. And the setup is really just the same as with that cloner. If we just twirl that down as well, you've got the same kind of hierarchy, but the matrix is doing exactly the same as the cloner if we just toggle between those two. And then all you do is drop in a cloner object and tell it to go into object mode and then clone onto the matrix. And that is how you can deform objects using the matrix. Next, we're going to look at MoText. This is just a really useful tool. A lot of you will be doing animated text in Cinema 4D, and it's very similar to the extrude tool. You've got those objects, you can have fillet caps and change those. In the object, you can type whatever you like. This could be the name of a company or a logo, and then you can choose fonts that are on your system as well. It has a really handy GUI for kerning, and you can fix things that might not be to your liking, so you can just change the kerning of the font, and then you can just turn that off once you're done. And of course, you have the whole world of MoGraph at your disposal, so you can put the effectors with these, and these can be on the whole thing, lines, so that could be like a whole paragraph, lines, words, and the default is letters. And then you can just choose the axis point for where those would be as well. If you ever wanted to take this out of the MoGraph world, you can make it editable, and you can then sort of use the extrude objects. That's what it creates once you make it editable. Next, we're going to talk about the tracer. This is one of my favorite objects. So we could grab ourselves a platonic object, for example, and then drag it into the tracer. And the tracer is just going to look at the vertices of the object that is inside the link here, and it will start tracing its path. So if we grab the platonic and started moving it around, the tracer is going to trace. So that all disappears once the playhead rewinds. So you could actually create some animation on the object, and I'm just going to use a quick tag called a vibrate tag and just get this rotating quite a bit in the viewport. It'll then do its own animation, and then you can give the tracer some volume, just like with other spline objects. So we could just use a sweep object and a profile for that. So that could be a circle. We'll drop that in and we'll make it a lot smaller. And then you just need the tracer in there as well. And now we can, if we just hide that platonic, now we're getting some crazy shapes. So we could then bring this down a lot smaller. And then another thing you can do with this tracer, which is great, is if you limit from the end, you can choose a frame range. If we just bring this over, so maybe something like 15 frames, and then it will start drawing itself off after a certain time. So there's all sorts you can do with these MoGraph objects, and there's plenty more to explore if you go up into this menu. So we've looked at the matrix and the motex, and we've just had a look at this tracer as well. And as you can see from the menu, there's plenty more objects, so go and explore them for yourself.